Today on the Forgiven Nutritionist podcast, I'm talking with Marley Jones. She's a doctor of naturopathy with over 20 years of professional experience and a lifetime of personal holistic healing. She specializes in brain health with a focus on the brain and central nervous system. Globally, she hosts the Healing Chronic Illness with Marley podcast and builds better brains with the Detox Stress and Mind Renewal Method, which is an online program. She's an instructor and a rep for the Neuroptimal brain training system. Marley's mission is clear. It's to relieve suffering and empower people to be flexible and resilient to life stressors. Watching this video that I'm going to play on her website had such a profound impact on me that I felt compelled to share it with you instead of a normal clip before the show. I felt as though she was speaking directly to me, expressing all the things that I wish that I could have told my younger self. Here's that video.
Hey, kiddo. It's me. I wish I could tell you what I know now. Where would I even begin? I guess I'd say, strap in. It's gonna be a journey. Life can be a great teacher if you're willing to learn, but pretty cruel if you're not. You're gonna be faced with a lot of choices. But in the end, it's up to you. No one can make them for you. So listen up. Say what needs to be said. Feel what needs to be felt, and don't try to be anyone else. Oh, and by the way, slow down. Because your kids, they aren't kids for very long. And your parents won't be around forever. You need to treasure the moments you're given, because trust me, they are gone before you know it. There's plenty of challenges along the way, so be resilient and flexible. Life doesn't get any easier, but why would you want it to? Lean in, find out what you're really made of, and don't be afraid to explore. After all, you're not doing this alone. Here's my advice. Live in the present and never stop growing. Never stop moving. And whatever you do, don't stop learning. There's greatness in you, and I think you know it. Go get 'em, kiddo. Live your moment.
Hey everyone, just a quick break to show some gratitude to our sponsors and give you some special deals. BrainMD nutraceuticals are high-quality supplements specifically designed to support and enhance brain health. Developed by Dr. Daniel Amen and his team of experts, these supplements use carefully selected ingredients backed by scientific research to promote cognitive function, mood stability, and overall mental wellness. BrainMD's commitment to purity and efficacy assures that their supplements provide targeted nutrition for the optimal brain performance and long-term brain health. Be sure to click my link in the show notes. Well, thank you so much today for joining us, Marley.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about yourself, your backstory, and I know we just watched that video that really definitely clinched it and why I had to have you on. So why don't maybe you tell us a little backstory behind that as well?
Well, I think it comes down to everyone kind of has their own journey on how they end up on things like the Forgiven Nutritionist podcast and why you even launched one in the first place, right? But now I have a challenging health journey that I've had to deal with, including a traumatic brain injury and Lyme disease and navigating through some of those things. So, that video just really speaks, I think, to a lot of people because we want to kind of tie into the real us. And when we don't feel well for a long time, particularly if you are struggling with a chronic illness or any type of brain issue, you wonder where you are in all of that. So trying to reconnect with who that is, I always say that the higher self and the inner child are actually the same person. We just get a disconnect somehow in life, whether it's trauma or an illness or some sort of life event that throws us off course. And so, yeah, learning how to make stress not be the enemy and instead use it to elevate ourselves to become stress resilient instead of being stuck in stress overwhelm. So I'm glad that video spoke to you so much, Wendy.
It did. And There's a country singer that talks about that they have a song too where they talk about a letter to myself, something about if I could write a letter to myself, and I've often thought about that. But then when I saw your video, it was like it was live and in person staring at me. And I'm like, yes, that would be so much of what I would tell my younger self too. And especially when you're struggling with depression or anxiety, which is what I used to suffer with, you're in those moments, even if it's just because of a traumatic experience, or it's something that you've suffered with for a long time, you can't always see the light that's at the end of the tunnel, or you can't always see where you're going to end up. And so you can only see the big hole that you're in right now. And so, when especially when that part, the clip where the divers, and you say, just breathe, we always forget that. And I was definitely guilty of that as well. Just pause and take a breath. Mm-hmm. And when you hit that bottom, there's only one way you can go back up, and so there's always an up, mm-hmm. and eventually you're going to hit that bottom, and that's okay, because you can just go back up again, and I think
good perspective.
Yeah. And again, I was definitely guilty of this myself, where it's easy to sink in and keep sinking to the bottom and feel like you're never going to go back up. But eventually, if you I just remember when I was a kid pushing off when you're swimming, you get to the bottom, you just push off, and before you know it, you shoot up and you're at the top already. You go
you need
up.
That air.
Yeah. And you go up 10 times faster, it seems like, than going down for some reason. Sometimes once you do that push off at the bottom, it just goes so much faster. And so that's like, to me, I don't know, that was just one of the biggest parts of the video and the whole story. It's like, of course, now that I'm on the other end of the spectrum.
Right. Yeah. Well, you talk about that big hole that you're in. I think for me, I spent decades in that valley of the shadow of death, and learning how to remain hopeful and persevere it's warfare to your soul. And, trying to stay encouraged is really, really difficult, and getting your mind to think happy thoughts or be positive if your brain doesn't work right. And they're not the same thing, Wendy. Your brain and your mind are not the same. And so I used to just lay on the floor in my house, just weeping and calling out to God to just renew my mind. And, having Lyme disease. So I ended up getting Lyme disease in 1999, but prior to that, I had a head injury. And prior to that, I grew up in a house with really bad toxic mold. So I had a lot of neuroinflammation going on and a lot of challenges with my brain. And of course, I did a SPECT scan through an Amen affiliate, Dr. Amen Clinics, which I know that you work for them. So it confirmed what I'd already thought. I had a TBI, and, whether it was from multiple concussions from being an athlete, or it was just from even the pathogenic infection from the Lyme, it causes that type of severe neuroinflammation that it just dysregulates your brain and you can't get out of it. And so I think I get what you're saying about sinking for a really, really long time. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago for me, through all the brain rehabilitation that I've done, that I really hit where I could push off the bottom of the pool and come to the top. And now that, I'm up for air, I'm doing that hand down thing to try and pull everyone else out of the pool.
That's great.
Right.
Well, and that's why I love and I gravitate towards people like you, because I too find that people don't realize that there are so many things that we can do, or that they can do themselves to help, whether it be 100%, it can go back, or you can get yourself 100% back, or even if you get yourself, because I think back to, again, myself, I can only understand what I went through, and I hear other people's stories, but even if you get back 50%, imagine how much better you're going to feel when you're 50% better,
right?
And then when at the time you're 50% better, what if you get another 25% better? Then you're already at 75% better, and just imagine what that could look like or feel like, and sometimes it's baby steps, and right. I say that it's in every podcast episode, but we live in this Amazon world where we want everything right now. And
instant.
It can take a lot of work to get to where we want to be, but it's so worth it.
It's so
And there's a
worth
lot
it.
of people out there that are willing to help and have a lot of options for people to work on their body and their
Right.
brain, especially.
Right, for sure. Well, I'm glad. I mean, we're part of what Dr. Amen calls a brain health revolution, and to be able to bring those tools to people that, traditionally the stuff that they've done hasn't worked so well. And then if we can kind of just get back a little bit more to nature and simplify things and go back to things like taking a deep breath, like you said, just to calm and regulate things. And I think I bring this up all the time that through COVID and all of the changes culturally and all of how the World Wide Web has just kind of brought everything to light. I just think that we're more distracted and more divisive than ever. And so we got to come back to like what's important and come back to things that are simple and bring us together and encourage one another and kind of let Mother Nature do its thing. I've been a naturopath for 20 years now, and it always comes back to, am I getting in the way? Because you can't force healing on the body. So that's like the number one thing, principle in naturopathy is that you stop the wrongdoing and you just let the body innately heal. And so anyway, I know that you described a bunch of questions and we're not even on them yet. So sorry if I'm on a rabbit trail.
No, that's okay, because I was literally just talking with somebody yesterday at church, saying how the body innately knows what to do and how to fix itself or try to get back to
homeostasis,
right.
God's
and
design. Yep.
Right. And it can only do that if we give it the things that we need. And sometimes that's literally, like you said, you leave it alone and you don't do anything to mess with it. Sometimes the body just needs time to rest and heal. Mm-hmm. And, or sometimes
sorry, go ahead.
No. And then I was going to say, and sometimes it needs neurofeedback.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Well, I had a lady contact me last week, and she's just a brilliant health coach, and she happens to be a pastor's wife, and she was telling me all the stuff that she had going on. She's working with an integrative doctor, and she's like, they're having me do this type of neurofeedback and I'm not really sure, and tell me more about what you do. And so I just unpacked the type of neurofeedback system that I use. And then I just got honest with her. As much as I love neurofeedback and now I work for the company that makes the systems, before I'm a salesperson, and before I'm a naturopathic doctor, I'm really just somebody who knows what it's like. And so I just told her, I said, I think you need to sit back and kind of just stop running to doctor appointments and wait on renting a system from me or even buying or leasing a system, because I just kind of feel like sometimes less is more. Mm-hmm. And so I text her later and I go, I know I'm a terrible salesman, and I'd love to rent you a system, but I really just feel led to let you know that you just kind of need to just take a step back and kind of recalibrate a little bit, and you'll know when the time's right. So that's the way I leave it. Yeah. I don't like getting too involved with it, because again, we got to get out of our own way, and I certainly don't want to get in the way of somebody else's healing either. So
yeah, and that's beautifully said. And sometimes, much like in life, we can always get in our own way. We're in our heads too much. We listen to the voices in our head that sometimes, give us negative thoughts and that aren't always true. And then that can spin us down a whole other rabbit hole as well, right, that we shouldn't listen to. And yeah, sometimes we just are too busy running to all these doctors as well, right. And sometimes we just need to take a pause.
That was me. Yeah, I did it. I used to have a full-time job where I literally had a doctor appointment at least 4 out of 5 days every week, and that went on for years because I just was desperate to feel better. And I tell you, I wish I had all that money back because I don't think a lot of it helped me. I think it put me more into forcing health on the body, and because of that, it put me into such a state of stress overwhelm that it made it worse. So that's one of the things that I tell people now, looking back with my own brain rehabilitation and then now working with people as just primarily doing functional brain health, is that before you do anything else, whether you change your diet radically, because you can be eating the cleanest diet, you can be taking the most premium supplements, you could be, doing your breath work and your grounding and purifying all of your food and detoxing your environment and on and on and on. But if you get so hyper vigilant about doing all of these things, it puts you in a stress response. So the first thing I believe anybody should ever do on a wellness protocol or a healing journey or following a diagnosis is do what you can do first and foremost to calm and regulate the brain and the central nervous system, and make that healing priority number one before you do anything else.
Yeah, not enough people know how to relax or de-stress. And I know that I'm 100% guilty of that. And my husband would totally agree that I can be very, he would call me hypervigilant on some things as well.
You're passionate.
Yes, I am passionate, and I'm aware because, and I know I briefly touched on this before we started recording, I want to live to 120. And, I currently do have traumatic brain injury, so that it may not last that long, but I want to last as long as possible and be as healthy as possible and be able to do as many things as possible for those full 120 years. But, so I'm trying to do all the things because I want to be happy during those times and mobile during those times and, aware during those times. And so I'm trying not to be, create negative relationships.
I think you can hit 120. No problem, sister. I'm with you.
I think I can too. So back to neurofeedback. That's basically what you do now when you talk about brain health. And until I actually worked at the Amen clinics, again, I suffered for depression and anxiety for years, and I don't suffer at all anymore. But anytime I ever went to a doctor, everything was about medication or talk therapy, which again, not that there's anything wrong with those things, but those were the only two options ever presented. And so, and I think that unless you have schizophrenia or bipolar or something, maybe then some other more serious things like TMS is introduced, but nobody ever gives any other options.
Right.
So I just want people to be aware that there's so many other options that can help. So maybe you can explain what neurofeedback is or how it works or what it is.
Sure. Well, I'll try to give you a Cliff Notes or Cole's Notes version. I'm Canadian, so I don't remember which is which in the United States. But the summation would be that neurofeedback is an EEG, electroencephalogram, or encephalogram form of biofeedback. So what it does is it allows your brain to detect the system I use, and I use Neuroptimal. I looked at other systems. There's probably, a couple of years ago when I looked, there were probably about 20 main systems, and now in the last couple of years, there's more than that. But there's a lot of other devices that claim to be neurofeedback. A lot of them are like frequencies of binaural beats or sounds or lights, and they're not quite the same. But the system that I use is called Neuroptimal Brain Training Systems, and it detects what your brain is doing, what it's about to do, and what it just did. And it does it at 256 times a second, which is great. And it could go faster if Microsoft was programmed faster. So they continue to update it and upgrade it. It's 20 years in the making by Dr. Valen Sue Brown, and he's just a brilliant man. He's got 3 PhDs. 2 of them are in mathematics and neuropsychology. And so Neuroptimal was pretty much born through that because he worked in the neurofeedback industry for years and years and years. And he just kept developing a better approach and a better way to do it that to me, honors the brain and the central nervous system by allowing it to self-correct and self-optimize without a protocol, without a QEEG brain map, and without a practitioner. So Neuroptimal in and of itself is a wellness device that allows every person's brain to self-optimize. And it's complex but simple. We call it synchronized chaos, and what it does, because our brains our brains and our bodies, we're a dynamical system. We're firing and doing all types of cellular things, and our glands, tissues, everything is constantly on the move and always moving, and our brain is even more complex than that. And so he's developed the neurofeedback brain training system to be like a mirror inside the head where your brain can see what it's doing. And because God gave us this innate ability with our survival brain to always want to move away from discomfort, the brain can see the things that it doesn't like about itself, and it allows it to self-correct. And so when someone comes in for neurofeedback, I'll put like 5 EEG. Well, there's 2 EEGs, and there's 2 clips on the ear, and then 1 on the right ear. 5 sensors, super simple. And which is really great because, if I'm working with squirmy kids or people that are in a really heightened anxious stress state, the more wires that you stick on their head, the more freaked out they get. I've worked with kids on the spectrum, and that can be a challenge because, they're uncomfortable. And I've worked with someone more recently with Tourette's, when that, those tics and those movements. So less is more, again, with Neuroptimal. So it's just detecting any type of cortical patterns. We say that they're like, when our brain gets into these states of, say, ruminating thoughts, or a symptom picture that doesn't serve us, or maybe a trauma loop, we end up having these consistent, persistent cortical patterns in our brain, and Neuroptimal interrupts those. And so to the user, you're just wearing the sensors, and then it's running through the neurofeedback program that is overlaid on top of this beautifully crafted, composed soundtrack. And it lasts about 30 minutes, and it has just nature sounds, and it has these little clicks and interrupts and pause sounds to the user. And that's what you hear. And I liken that to be similar to if you're driving down the interstate, and say, just like your thinking gets a little off track, if your driving gets a little off track, what happens? You hit those little rumble strips on the side of the road, and it goes da-da-da-da-da, and it catches your attention. So if you want to, you can hit the ditch, or you can go into the wrong lane of traffic, or go off the bridge. We've got them on our causeways because I'm here in Florida. And so, yeah, you want to stay in your lane, right? I mean, that's good life advice. But with Neuroptimal, it's the same kind of thing. It'll have those interrupts to alert you, hey, you're just getting a little off course. Now, to your cognitive conscious mind, you're like, I don't even know what I was thinking about. But, your brain's busy doing all kinds of stuff on a subconscious, unconscious level as well. So when it can interrupt those cortical patterns, and the brain can move away from discomfort, from the things that have happened to us that don't serve us, it can see it, and then it can kind of rewire in a new direction that is neuroptimal. We call it brain optimization. And so it's a beautiful process. And every time you train, you comprehensively learn more. And there's really no end to it. Like, I got my system before I ever became like a neurofeedback provider. I did it for personal reasons because I needed it to deal with being stuck in chronic stress, anxiety, depression, overwhelm, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, and just laying around most days watching life go by. And so, because when you're stuck in that chronic state of stress overwhelm, you can't, like we said earlier, get out of it. Like, I I know that it had changed my life because when I got my system the end of June, I was functioning okay. We went ahead and bought a system for me because I had lost my dad during COVID, and I'm Canadian and basically wasn't allowed to see him. I was having a hard time getting back into my country, all of that. So talk about like high level stress, right? So through that process, my dad passed, and to me that was more added grief. So I looked at, well, I'm already barely functioning. I can barely go to the grocery store. The smells, the sights, the sounds, they were just put me into overwhelm. And so losing my dad on top of it, I was like, I don't know what else to do. So of course I started looking for counselors and therapists. And when I went down that road, Wendy, I realized that was more stress, trying to unpack and process. And I knew that if I'd found a good therapist, which I was having a hard time doing, they were going to tell me what I already knew, like, let go and process this. And, I'm like the poster child for like codependent relationships because of my kind of childhood trauma history. And I realized that the stacks of books beside my bed were the same ones that I was going to be told to read after the loss of my dad and processing grief. And so I kind of hit a wall, and that's when I realized maybe it's not just my thinking. Maybe it's just not that my mind's not right. Maybe it's another part of the piece of the puzzle of it being a brain issue. And that's exactly what it was for me, because now that I have done all this neurofeedback training and went from not being able to go to the grocery store to doing crazy stuff. I don't know if I told you this, Wendy, but it's one of my fun stories. I live in Florida. And so I thought, what is one of the most Florida things you can do? So, I'm someone from the chronic illness life to doing better to now I'm living my bucket list and into peak performance. I work with peak performance athletes now. And now I find myself being like one of them. Like, how can I optimize and live my bucket list? So since I live in Florida, I thought, wouldn't it be a rush to go alligator hunting?
Oh my gosh.
And so last fall, of course, this is a couple years into training. It was only a few months of training for me that I started to do things like hop on an airplane and 12 hours before it was time to leave, I bought a ticket. Like, I used to have to budget every time I did anything to leave my house because I just didn't have the energy, and I didn't have the mental resilience and the fortitude to do much of anything. And so my alligator slaying story is a good one, because talk about a rush. Like, a normal person, or let me back it up. A lot of the people that are alligator hunters in the community that I've gotten to know, they're like former combat veterans, and they get out there and they like to get out in nature because it helps them process and, ground and be in nature, because a lot of them in that community have PTSD, right? So gator hunting in the dark, first time, not knowing what I was doing, would put anybody into a state of a stress disorder. But I did it, and it was a rush. And when I had the gator in the boat, I went home and went to bed. Like, I needed that cortisol in the moment, and the epinephrine, the norepinephrine. But then when the stressor was over, I could downregulate. Whereas before, when I'd lay on my couch or in my bed at home, I was in a high state of anxiety and could not get out of it. When there was nothing around me that was going on that would be stress inducing. It was just that my nervous system was absolutely tanked and my adrenals were shot, and on and on it goes, from the head injury, but also just from the pathogenic infection from having Lyme and mold illness. So that's kind of a roundabout way of saying that everybody should train their brain.
Yes, yes. Well, and that's one of the things that's about anxiety too, that I definitely remember, and I know a lot of people can relate to, is when you're in those moments of anxiety, yes, you can see an alligator. So there's something physical you can wrap your arms around, your brain can literally see, so it can understand why your
Legitimate
body
threat.
is now physically feeling the fight or flight response. But when you're standing in the kitchen just getting a cup of coffee, or washing a dish, or sitting out on your back patio, sometimes your brain is going through some of the same physiological symptoms as when you're wrestling an alligator and you don't understand why.
It's very
and
scary.
so yeah, and so that's good to know that, or maybe hopefully people can think about, okay, maybe neurofeedback could help me get some of that regulation back.
That's
with
what it's
some of
designed
that.
for.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so, since we touched on anxiety and stuff, I would imagine the same with depression as well. That could easily help with. What are some other things that neurofeedback can really help with?
Well, so for FDA compliance and with any type of honoring the body, like we can't say that we cure, treat, whatever, any disease, but people say, well, who's neurofeedback for? And my answer is, if you got a brain, you can train. And so, but clinically, the majority of the people that I see are people that can't handle stress properly. They just have the inability. It's not because they're weak or they're a moral failure, and addictions are the same thing. I see people trying to modulate, like be able to handle life, but like they want to come off of Prozac, or they want to stop smoking pot, or they want to stop drinking. So addictive behaviors, people with anxiety and depression, absolutely very common. I get a lot of people that have some cognitive decline issues or brain fog. It seems like probably, I'd say upwards of 70% of the people I see are like menopausal, postmenopausal, perimenopausal women. There's a few men I see here and there, but for the most part, men really, for whatever reason, go in their man cave when it comes to mental health issues instead of going and working on some things. We're going to continue to educate and try to change that stigma for sure. But yeah, I've worked with people pretty deep on the ASD or autism spectrum. Some people have been so ill that they could hardly walk in the door. And some people have neurological problems where they are like, have really bad vertigo, or they have spasms or tics. And then I have people that are optimally healthy, like one fella that I train, he's a 5-time world champion in his sport, and he still holds the world record in what he does, and he just wants to have a competitive edge. And so that's his competitive edge, is to train his brain. And what's cool is last fall I actually went to his competition and watched him win his 5th world title. And when he'd come into the clinic following, he was describing it. He goes, you know what? I've been doing this since I was 16 years old, and I've been around the world, and I've won all of these times. And he said, this competition was the first time ever that I was completely in flow state. I had all of like the focus I needed and the energy that I needed, but I was in such a state of zen. And he said that that's never ever happened before. And then he goes, do you think it was the neurofeedback? I'm like,
Well, and I think, and you touched on it earlier, and Dr. Amen says this all the time, and until it really happened to me, I really had no idea what that meant. But when you work on your brain, your mind will follow.
Absolutely.
And once I did, I worked on just getting my body and my brain healthy. And then it was like, yeah, my mind just naturally flowed with it, and
Yep.
Dr. Perry Nicholson says, no system ever heals alone or gets injured alone. So when it gets injured, you start to work on one thing and it's going to have a ripple effect to everything else in your body. And so hopefully people can really remember that too, that, if you work on your brain and you fix your brain and some of the things that are going on with it, and even just give it some of the nutrition that it needs, or point it in the right direction. Sometimes it needs neurofeedback. Then the rest is going to kind of fall into place just naturally.
No, it's true. Like, you remember the stack of books beside my bed that I don't even have to read them anymore because all that stuff makes sense. Like, it's practical application, that it's not like I have to like strategize and try to recreate a certain behavior to try and like tolerate this relationship with this person, whether it's like for example, boundaries. Like, that's Dr. Clouden Townsend's book. I've circulated so many copies of that book over the years, but everything that they say is so common sense and so applicable to me now, because why? I know how to stay in my lane because my nervous system is regulated, and when it's not my issue to pick up, I don't pick it up. And so when you're finally comfortable in your own skin and you're finally in a place where you have that self-optimization because your brain is functioning, all the files of your past start to make sense, and they're kind of filed away nicely instead of like scattered all over the place because your hippocampus can't process and all your memories are a big hot mess. And that was me, because before I did neurofeedback, I tried other brain training programs like the Gupta method and dynamic neuroretraining system. And they were just too hard for me to do. For one, I couldn't access a positive childhood memory. And so once everything started to regulate and my brain became balanced through the neurotraining, all of those thoughts, positive thoughts, common sense things that I used to buy all the latest books and then like try to drill it in and make it habitual, now it just flows and it makes sense. And I can't explain it other than the fact that my brain is working now. So now my thoughts are, they're the kind of thoughts that I prayed for so long, that I would have my mind renewed. And so, yeah, and it's awesome to be at a place to do that now. And I'm actually getting ready to launch an online program that I call the Mind Renewal Method, because I do want to work with people that were kind of like in my shoes. There's a lot of women that want to be like the Proverbs 31 woman, and they want to serve, they want to have compassion, they want to love, they want to care for their families, they want to be a good wife, they want to be in community and serve in their neighborhood and all of these things, and they're stuck in a fetal position at home. They might not physically look like that, but on the inside they are. And it's because we have put so much on ourselves and these expectations to, function in a world that is just really complex and divisive now. And so, I don't know, I want to just like that video, talk to the younger self and the younger me, because I think if you've studied anything with neuroscience, which I know you do, Wendy, you've got your convergent brain and your divergent brain. Mm-hmm. And so when we're kids and we're our happy little inner child, we're exploring, we're using our imagination, we're creative. And then as we get older, we get stuck in these rigid patterns of being rule followers and being compliant. And our education is about memorizing facts so that we can get a job. And, all of that stuff as we get older, we don't find value in anymore. Unless, of course, you're retired and you get into scrapbooking and quilting or whatever your creative thing is. But we lose ourselves along the way because we're we're moms, we're friends, we're sisters, we're busy filling all of these roles, but we get so disconnected with kind of like the heart of God for us and who we are. And so we get so busy being a human doing that we forget that we're a human being. And so I think it's just really important that part of that renewing our mind can only come, like you said, first with the brain, and then it just kind of overlays, and then the mind renewal can happen if the brain is working properly.
Yeah. Well, and since you mentioned earlier that you put 5 little things on your head basically in different spots, what can somebody kind of expect during, let's say, their first neurofeedback session, just to give them kind of an idea so it makes it a little more less scary or abstract?
Right. Well, as far as coming in and doing a session, or if you rent a session and do it at home, the systems are made for the end user so that you don't have to go to a clinic, which is kind of nice, because a lot of people have like white coat trauma and they don't love the clinical setting. And so what to expect is you have to put conductive paste on the sensors because it helps get a better cortical reading, because it's electrical, just like an EKG gets a reading of your heart and EEG does of your brain, because it's emitting electricity. And so when you put the sensors on, you click start on the program and you just start hearing music, and it starts to make little clicks and interrupt sounds and pauses, like the vibration strips or the rumble strips on the side of the highway. And it's a half an hour and then it's over. And most people, since I'm a trainer and I offer it professionally to people, I'll go back in the room and I usually kick people back in a recliner and say, you know what, if you want to be on your phone, you can, but everybody needs a brain break. We're on it too much anyway. But the beauty is whatever you can do to brain train and to use it, we want you to use it. So if you need to be answering emails or reading a book or taking a nap, with this program, you can do that. You can multitask. But I really do think it's beneficial to just kind of unplug for a while and daydream. And so after a session, most people report, and I see it, that they're in like this, I didn't nap, or I did nap, but I'm so relaxed. I'm so rested. I feel refreshed. I say it's like going to the gym and the spa at the same time, because you are training your brain, but it's just such a relaxing process and it's so easy. So all these other neuroplasticity programs and brain training programs, they require you to like focus. And, I believe that when your brain works, you can squash the ants. Like Dr. Amen says, another negative thought, question it. Is it true? Is it absolutely true? If it's not, believe the absolute opposite of that. And I think that's also Byron Katie, because she talks about that as well. But, when you train enough, and because it's interrupting those persistent, consistent cortical patterns that don't serve you, it's interrupting those thought processes that don't serve you, and those old tapes that we've played from our childhood of, you're not good enough, or why aren't you like this, or I should be this. All of that stuff just starts to dissipate. And the beauty of it is that like, you can still hold the memory of it, but the sting isn't there anymore. And that's when you know that healing comes.
Oh, that's beautifully said, because, much like going to the gym, if you go to the gym once, it's definitely helping you.
Yeah.
But if you go 20 times, it's going to help you that much more if you go 20 times. And obviously the more you go, but I'm assuming that it's not something that you always have to do. Like medication, where people think that once they're on a medication, they always have to be on a medication. So like, how often do you normally, on average, like recommend people do it?
Well, yeah, it just depends on the individual. We always say that if you're going to start a brain training program with the neurofeedback, you need to give it at least 12 to 15 sessions to notice your first shift. Some people notice it sooner. Some people it takes a little longer because everybody's baseline is different. So, I've heard crazy testimonies from different people, and I've seen it from different people. Some people literally will have one session, and the next time I hear from them, they're like, okay, that is the first night I've been able to sleep in like years after one session. And you're like, oh, awesome. Must have been exactly what you needed. And then there's some other people that train for longer and need to train longer. So things like anxiety, depression, ADD, and those things, and neurofeedback in general, they say has like an 85% success rate. So it makes you wonder about the other 15%. So some of those statistics include the linear form of neurofeedback, which is not the system that Neuroptimal is. And that system is a little different because it's training you according to certain states. I'm not a fan of that just because I think your brain needs to be wherever it needs to be in the present moment. And that linear form of neurofeedback, because it's an entraining principle, it's kind of like acute care allopathic medicine. There's a time and a place. If you need open heart surgery because you've got, clogged arteries or whatever, then changing your diet at that point isn't going to matter. So
not the immediate, that's for sure.
You need acute care. And so I think that linear neurofeedback is okay if you're dealing with things that are like really severe. Maybe it's like suicide ideation or something like that. And you want to get out of that like high intense state. And so maybe the entrainment principles of bringing people down to like a lower alpha theta state is good because you don't want to be there. But the problem is that when those protocols are run, they kind of put you in that state. And then just like an SSRI does chemically puts you in a state, it comes with side effects. And the way that they deal with being in that state is, well, then we'll run another protocol to get you out of that state. So that's why I love Neuroptimal, because there's no protocols. You're training the brain to be in the present moment because that's where health and homeostasis is. You're not stuck in a trauma loop from the past. You're not worried about, is my bank account going to, outlast my retirement? You're in the here and now. And so that's why it's beautiful. And so people can do however many sessions they are to like kind of like resolve some of the issues that they have. Now, here's something, Wendy, that is going to come up. Well, does it work for my insomnia? I haven't been able to sleep ever since, I turned 40. I'm starting to, struggle with sleep and on, which if you're in that age group, I'm way past that now. But,
yeah.
That's been something that somebody came with, and guess what it resolved first? Their migraines. So because you're allowing the brain and the central nervous system and the body to determine the healing priority, it's going to work on what it wants to work on. And because it's moving away from discomfort, the beauty of it is when you downregulate the nervous system and the body feels safe, all of that energy and vitality is freed up because you're no longer stuck in a stress response, which takes a lot of energy. And all of that extra energy now can be used for healing, right? So it's a beautiful thing to see that, people have come in and they've come for a while. They might come like twice a week, 3 times a week. If people come more often than that, I usually rent them a system because it's just more cost effective. And I'd rather rent a system anyway, just because if I can do more at home for less, and I let anybody else in the family train as well for the same price. I just make it unlimited. And that's another thing. We co-regulate. Anybody who lives together, we co-regulate. That's just how our nervous systems are. So if dad's in a really stressful job, but they want little Jimmy, who's, saucing back to the teacher or whatever, to train, but dad comes home and he's rah, 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 it doesn't help. Like, it can help little Jimmy, but then he's still got these intrinsic constraints that are affecting his healing. So if everybody in the family can train, everybody can calm and regulate their nervous system and balance their brain and train it for optimization. And then the whole family starts to thrive and do better. So with that respect, there's no, like, if you decide this is the bee's knees, which it is for me, I'm so glad I have my own system. And of course I have a fleet now because I'm provide it for other people and I do rentals and I sell systems, is I'll always train. But it probably took me, Wendy, from like training every day, the end of June till about mid-September, for me really to have a radical shift. Now, that sounds like a lot, and it was, but since I enjoyed the process and it was me time and I did it once a day, it took a little longer, but I had really bad issues. And I had issues since I was a kid with anxiety and depression, and then the chronic pain and all the other stuff that came later. So it took me a long time to like go, okay, this is really transformative, but you know, life still throws me curveballs. I still have things to contend with. So every now and then I'm like, it's time to run a session. So it's the same thing with people that come to my clinic. You know, they'll come for a while, they'll meet their goals, and then I might not see them again for a while. And then they'll be like, oh, I just came back from this big trip and I was with my in-laws. I really need a session. So they come in for a tune-up. And so it's everybody's different. So I know that's a long answer to a short question, is, you know, who's it for and how many times do you do it? But yeah, I generally don't have people long term because they meet their goals or they end up buying their own because they love it so much. So and I'll always check in with the people that have bought a system, even if they bought one several years ago and they're still using it and they're still seeing changes and they're still doing things that they never thought that they were capable of doing. And so that's a win for me every time.
Well, and I think that you give people too, you said for yourself, and, you know, just during our conversation, they've heard a little bit of your story as well. So going to me, when you look at going from July to September, I mean, yeah, that does seem like a long time, but at the same time in your whole life, that's only what, 3 months?
Yeah.
You know? And I mean, for you to feel and notice a difference in 3 months, I mean, that to me is, it's like if people can just think, okay, so I'm not going to get it in 2 days, like I can get my things with Amazon, but 3 months. Okay. Can I just wait 3 months? Can I try something out for 3 months and see what have I got to lose? I don't have anything to lose. I'm not going to be worse off than I am now. That's for sure. So I think, you know, when you look at a number like that, it gives people at least something to really kind of identify with, you know, and maybe kind of not that you want to compare apples to apples, but, you know, they know what they're going through. They heard some of the things that you went through and they think, okay, what do I have to lose? Like you said, I said, you know, 3 months.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. When I launch I'm getting close to do my mind renewal method. That's one of the things, the main key components that I'm going to offer. It'll be a 4-month coaching program, but 3 months of it will be neurofeedback training for sure.
Yeah.
It's a key component. And I think it is the missing element for people that are super stressed, to just have something to support and help them that's easy, that will change their life. Because I mean, I'm talking, you know, I'm 50 now, and it wasn't up until a couple of years ago that I was functioning better than I've been since I was in grade school, when I first got mold toxicity, and then all of the other stuff that happened after. I was always just kind of in survival mode, and that's a long time to be that way. And so 3 months is something to say, yeah, it's a lot. And then I even look back to it, the amount of money that we spent before I focused on brain health. My husband and I probably, because Lyme is complicated, I do the math over 20 plus years of having Lyme, chronic Lyme, and trying everything. I mean, it's like upwards of probably $170K. And so for me to go, I'm going to buy a Neuroptimal machine, which, it's a hefty price tag. The machines are around 10 grand US dollars. But in the scheme of things, I would have saved a ton of money if I'd had that all those years ago. And because, if your central processing unit, which is your brain, doesn't work properly, then even all the money that you're spending on supplements, it's kind of a waste. And all the organic good foods that you eat, they're not going to be as effective as if you did it when your nervous system and your brain was calm and regulated, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned before when you were talking about vertigo, when I got bit by a tick last summer, that was the first thing. And my husband could attest to this. It's like I immediately had this horrible vertigo. It was awful. And it was, and I'm going to be 52 in September. So, I'm getting older. So, your hearing loss slowly starts to go. And I'll say at the time, my hearing was loss was a 2, maybe a 3, but it went from like that to like a 10, like almost overnight.
Yeah. It's just inflammation. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it was so bad. And so, I mean, it's then since subsided and dramatically back to the 3, since I had healed a lot of the Lyme and stuff like that. But yeah, I would love to know, like, I'm curious now because I had never heard about that for vertigo and things like that. But man, I'm totally curious about for myself now about, Lyme. Yeah. I hadn't thought about it for Lyme and.
Right. No, that's the beauty of it, is that it just supports the body to heal and the brain to self-optimize. The one vertigo it was a strange phenomena that she had. Like she would like walk down her hallway at home and then she'd run into the wall. But the scariest thing, and this is why she called me, is she was driving out of state, and I've never heard of this before, but her world turns upside down where she was seeing everything inverted, and it freaked her out. And you know what? I actually should probably call Dr. Johnson or Dr. Hector down at Amen Hollywood and ask them, like, have you ever heard of such a thing? But that's why she came in, and she came in for probably a couple of months, once every other week, and then she rented a system. And so after the 30-day rental is when she brought it back, and then she's like, I'm good, I'm fine, everything's normal, no more dizzy spells. She's come back a handful of times every like 3 or 6 months just for a tune-up. But the vertigo thing isn't like it was. So, and that's the only thing she did different. So she is supposed to be moving to Pennsylvania and wanting to open a neurofeedback clinic there. I need to call her.
Are there any resources or anything that you can recommend for those interested in learning more about neurofeedback?
Well, they can contact me if they'd like. Of course, you can Google Neuroptimal, but of course, I'd love for you to connect with me. I am found, my URL is harmonyneurofeedback.com. I do have a few videos that I put out there that are explainer videos. That's where the one with the clip that you're showing is from. But and I've got a certification training coming up. In fact, offering a promo that if you do buy a machine, you can pretty much get your certification training done for free. And that's really what my goal is, Wendy, is for people to individually heal and allow their families to heal, but then pay it forward. Like, get a system, use it, feel better, and then offer it to friends in your school systems, your church, your community. Open a clinic if you want, because I really just want to see this technology available to people, because it is so life-changing. And I always say that, we could solve world peace if everybody would train their brain. Mm-hmm. Honestly, we could.
Yeah, the world will be a lot different of a place, that's for sure. And especially after COVID, because I think COVID really put a lot more people, well, I think I shouldn't say that it didn't put them more in depression and anxiety. I think it just made it more obvious that they probably already were experiencing some things. And
a bit of both. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it did kind of bring out the dysfunction because people didn't have their regular outlets or vices or anesthesia to look to. But then also with COVID itself, it was an uptick of neuroinflammation, which spikes issues with the vagus nerve and neuroinflammation in the brain, and things like COVID long haul. COVID long haul is just another name, honestly, for chronic fatigue syndrome. It's just, it's what it is now. And so it does affect people. And I think particularly with young people, it was like 93% increase in teen depression through COVID. I mean, what a hard time to not be able to go to school with your friends or miss homecoming or prom or all of those things. And it was just kind of a dark time. I had my son in high school, my other son in college during COVID, and it was a whole different world. And I think people are still trying to come out of that because, again, it was about distraction and division. We were having a virtual life, and with technology and social media and comparison, all that stuff that can be such a deficit to our brain health and mess up our neurotransmitters, which is completely proven that we're in a different world now. And I think brain training and neuroscience, thank God, we're just on the beginning of it, and knowing that, we're not stuck with the brains we're born with, and things like epigenetics and neuroplasticity are so real and so awesome. Thank God. That's just like God to make something like that gives us the tools, and we're finally figuring it out.
Yeah, it is a beautiful thing, especially when not only can you see it on yourself, but you can see it in other people too, how, you really aren't stuck with the brain you currently have. You can really do things to make things better. And I like to say they're not easy, but there are simple things that you can do, because a lot of times it's more about our habits and our routines that are the biggest challenges. And like you said, we have to get out of our own way a lot of times, know, and since you mentioned earlier that competitor or the athlete, how can it really help with enhancing that kind of performance? Was it just that it put him in that more relaxed state, like he mentioned the Zen?
Well, for this particular individual, he, with training, stopped drinking alcohol. So even in that just helps blood flow to the brain, right? So like I said, it can work on other things, and everybody has a different goal. But if your brain is optimizing, you start handling higher levels of for him, it's like a different view of stress. And so and this is something that I feel really strongly about for people, is to not fear stress. Because we all have it. And when you go to the doctor, they'll say, well, stress is going to kill you. Go home and don't be stressed. And then you hear that and you're more stressed. So if you can become flexible and resilient to stress, that's what Neuroptimal does. The whole part of Zengar, the formulators and creators of Neuroptimal, is to relieve suffering. And they do it by building flexibility and resiliency in the brain and the central nervous system. So for this athlete, it was just for him, he's older now. He's actually had a brain bleed. He had a severe traumatic brain injury. And this was only a few years ago. And so he's just kind of dropped into he's so much older than his competition, but he's got to work a little harder because, he's not like the young bucks, but his training regimen is more intense, and his recovery time is better. And the fact that he is enjoying being in the moment and celebrating life without his vices, which was alcohol and wasn't helping him, it's just a beautiful thing to see for this guy to continue to get better at whatever it is. Because, and he's an athlete, but he's a dad, and he's also an entrepreneur businessman. And so he's got other things in the fire and things that he's working with. And so with any other athlete, for them to be able to drop in and focus, it's awesome. And there's another fella that he had actually connected me with, and he was a former major league all-star pitcher. And, if he would have had Neuroptimal when he was younger, it would have changed his life, because, he had an injury that took him out. And then he's like, well, I've got my contract, and all these people counting on me, teammates, coaches, whatever. He goes back to pitching, and then it's a career-ending injury after that. And that's the stuff that people like that will tell me is like, man, if I had only felt like I could think more clearly, and I had that stress resilience to know, what's my margin? Should I be doing this? Should I not? And then, if you've got all of these voices in your head from childhood going push, 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 and then it completely takes you out, then it doesn't serve you in any way. So if you're calm and you're regulated and you're flexible and you're resilient to stress, there's honestly nothing that I think that we cannot accomplish.
Yeah, I think that people don't put enough emphasis on the importance of stress or pay attention to what things really are playing a stressful role in their life. They just, like you said, kind of either ignore it or live in denial about some of the things that they're going through. Or
they're just scared, or they're just scared of it in general. Well, why not, like you said, go into the gym and work out and build stress resilience instead of stress avoidance? And so that way you're like, I can elevate and I can overcome and I can persevere, and girl, I got this. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know that earlier you mentioned a little bit about where people can look for you on your website for some resources, but why don't you tell us again where we can find you, follow you, listen to your podcast, because you have a podcast as well.
I do. It's not as fancy as yours, but okay. So my podcast is Healing Chronic Illness with Marley, and it's streaming on all platforms, I think. And my website is Harmony Neurofeedback. And you can find me on Facebook, Harmony Neurofeedback, Instagram, Harmony Neurofeedback. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, particularly if you are interested in adding neurotraining to your existing practice, or you're just like, I want a system myself, you can reach me. I've got probably my best email would be just harmonyneurofeedback@gmail.com. And you can hit me up there, and I'd love to help anybody who's in a situation that they just need a way out of, and happy to coach them through and be their biggest cheerleader too.
Well, and I will put all those links in the show notes for people too. So
thank you.
Well, it was a pleasure to have you on. But before we go, I always ask my guests for their don't miss this moment. It would be the one key real takeaway that they would want the listener to kind of remember or to take away. If they don't remember anything else, they want that one thing. What would yours be?
Oh gosh. Well, I think for me to not fear stress, but instead get good at it, and do it by training your brain to be flexible and resilient so that it can handle challenges, it can handle life curveballs, and so that you can step into kind of like your purpose and why you're here and be doing things on your bucket list. So just kind of flipping the script of taking stress and having it work for you by building flexibility and resiliency in your brain and nervous system. That's what I want everybody to be doing.
Well, that's great. Thank you again so much for being on tonight. I definitely appreciate you taking the time away from your personal life and clients and things like that to be with us.
My pleasure, Wendy. Thanks for having me.
Pendulum Probiotics is a powerhouse in gut wellness. Akkermansia, Metabolic Daily, and Glucose Control all contain Akkermansia, which is a key player in gut health. It fosters the growth of Akkermansia, aiding in digestion, nutrient absorption, immune resilience, and a positive impact in your overall well-being. If you're ready to experience Pendulum Probiotics, unlock an exclusive 20% discount on your first month's membership by entering my unique code when you click on the Linktree link in the show notes. If you want to continue learning and hearing all things nutrition for your mind, body, and soul, click like, subscribe, or favorite me on whatever podcast platform you use, or you can find me at ForgivenNutritionist.com. This podcast was designed to educate, inspire, and empower you to achieve your health and wellness goals. It is not meant to diagnose or treat any illness or medical condition or take the place of any treatments from your current healthcare providers.